Okay, so we are live from the metaverse today. Right now, there's a lot of buzz about the metaverse, and that this is a huge opportunity that should not be missed. It's developing this massive fear of missing out or FOMO. But for many people, when I say the word metaverse, people have no idea what I'm actually talking about. You probably read the news that Facebook lost $10 billion trying to invest in the metaverse this year, which pales in the comparison to the 270 million that they lost after reporting less users and less revenue from advertisements due to their inability to track people on their phones, particularly the iPhones. So I want to talk about what what is this the history of the metaverse, and I want to explore what are the business opportunities in the metaverse. And so if you're ready with me, we're going to dive deep into the dungeon of the metaverse. Hey, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm just a geek dad who's obsessed about the future, and working in 3D worlds has been something that gamers have been doing for years. And that's why today this particular live stream takes place in in Minecraft. Uh, if you look up the definition of metaverse, like say on Wikipedia, you'll find that it says it's just this network of 3D virtual worlds focused on social connection. In other words, it's a 3D internet populated with a lot of people. And so we don't really get a metaverse until we have a lot of people online. And that's the key. You need people who are online in order for this to make any sense. And so you can see like a number of companies are investing very heavily right now. So for example, Microsoft announced that they were acquiring Activision, the gaming company that makes games such as World of Warcraft and Overwatch, where there's a huge number of players. So they've already purchased Minecraft many years ago. And then more recently, Sony announced that they had acquired Bungie, the developer behind the Destiny series, and the first few Halo games as well. And so I believe that Halo itself it's interesting. The actual like brand itself of Halo is owned by Microsoft. But gaming companies spent over, for example, gaming companies spent over $12.7 billion to acquire Zynga, the maker of Farmville. These numbers are absolutely insane. You know, Sony spent a reported 3.6 billion on the acquisition in order to acquire Bungie, and Microsoft spent 69 billion on the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. So we're talking about some of the largest gaming company acquisitions in history. They're all happening within the last few weeks. So what the heck is going on? Why are these companies so interested in investing in gaming companies all of a sudden? Like why wouldn't they just try to acquire them like earlier? Why now? Why this particular moment? And so it has a lot to do with the direction that they feel the metaverse is going to be. And you certainly can see that there's like a lot of buzz about that today, but this term metaverse is not new at all. In fact, the first reference to it comes from Neil Stephenson's book, the fiction book Snow Crash, which was written in 1992. In it, really, it's just this metaverse is just a combination of two words, or it's like a portmanteau of meta and universe. And of course, in this particular book, people live in this future dystopia, which is like an online virtual reality environment that people can log into using VR goggles. I should bring up my goggles. or they can go into like virtual reality booths, and then they can kind of like an old phone booth, except it's like virtual reality. And of course, there's an internet town that is this massive world that is just a single street that goes on and on and on for a very long distance. And you move between the different areas by just using a huge monorail. And so essentially, this world or this online world is policed by a group called the Global Multimedia Protocol, or GMP group. And it's kind of introduced that this notion of an online world would be very important. And of course, we've seen practical implementations of this. In 2003, we had the online game that many might know as Second Life, which was referred to as an early, massively multiplayer online game, MMOG, or like an online role-playing game. So this is like a precursor to many of the games with 3D virtual worlds that we just see today. We have like Minecraft, where I'm in today, and Roblox, which are both active worlds. And we have games like Fortnite, for example, which are their own virtual worlds as well. Now, another reference to the metaverse, so I was talking about Snow Crash, so I'm going to go into Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. He refers to a virtual world known as the oasis that people seek refuge to because we live in this climate dystopia where there's been economic stagnation for a really long time. So people use the virtual world in order to escape from their current reality, but they also use it to work as well. And in 2017, Microsoft acquired the AltSpace virtual reality platform that has been quite successful at as a space for running events and presentations. And I've seen some of these presentations in AltSpace, where people will give a presentation, they'll describe some aspects of it. And it's interesting now to see today that Microsoft has integrated AltSpace, some aspects of this virtual reality, into Microsoft Teams. So they're very early to bring in virtual reality to the Teams meeting space. And so we'll see how that goes. But it's designed to give a more immersive experience if someone is using something like goggles, for example. And I know this isn't even a new concept, even given that the name itself is more than 20 years old. But the difference now is that the hardware is becoming much more readily available. We're seeing sales of the formerly Oculus Quest, but now it's called MetaQuest, that certain virtual reality headsets have become more consumer affordable. There is virtual reality capabilities built into our tablets and our phones these days. And so there's definitely a move towards the metaverse from a software perspective. A lot of the acquisitions that we are seeing are going towards these proprietary gaming platforms. So, for example, the competition here is there's many different types of in the metaverse. You could imagine things like, well, which 3D modeling standard are we going to use? So, for example, NVIDIA, Pixar, and Blender, and 3D Studio Max are all using this file format called Universal Scene Description, USD, while Microsoft, Meta, Valve, Steam are all using another standard known as OpenXR. Now, all of these descriptions that I'm giving you is kind of like a current state of things. However, I want to explain again, okay, so what, right? What's the big deal? And what should businesses actually care about? And I think that most descriptions, like the Wikipedia descriptions, they're completely useless from the perspective of business. And I think if there was a description that I read on Twitter, which I think is far more meaningful for the world of business, and it's more in line with the way that I see the metaverse. And I would argue that in essence, we already live in a bit of the metaverse today. That is, it's just the internet connected to location. And the way that we can see the metaverse is the value of virtual goods is increasing. It's increasing over time. And it's just a point in time where we value our digital goods more than we do our physical goods. That's the time. So already with your phone or your tablet, you can go and scan. You can go and scan a QR code, right? And you can get location-based information. We already actively use things like Google Maps. We go to a restaurant, we scan the QR code, and then we get the menu at that restaurant. So these experiences themselves are not necessarily really social on the internet, but at the very least, they're social, like we're with other people. And if you play any video games, right, a lot of that is a very social experience as well. We haven't focused much on like specific social activities, but I would say that like really it's just like pointing people to your website, right? Like you want it to be, we're no longer just talking about a single website. We're talking about like an experience that people want to have. And so, yes, there are social aspects, but that definitely needs to increase. And there is a discussion going on. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant, there's reviews. There is a social component to it. If you have Yelp, for example, so that's pretty close. It's not fully 3D, but you still get a sense of, oh, this is what people think about this restaurant. So usually, what we do is that we take everything that is 3D and we just merge it all into this same 2D plane, like on a map, like on a 2D map. But you can imagine in the future, of course, instead of like having one map for a very tall building, let's say that it's a mall, each floor of the building, you could have like a 3D map of some sort. And then we're getting a little bit closer to the example of a metaverse where you've basically got like a mall with different floors. So of course, our phones themselves are becoming more aware, right? Like some of these, for example, even the iPad that I have here has a 3D LiDAR sensor, which is able to more easily determine their location over time. And eventually, we're going to get towards a technology known as just mapping, like simultaneous location and mapping or SLAM tracking. And all this means is that we can just figure out where your phone or where your tablet is in 3D to a very precise location. I mean, we can kind of do that with GPS, but it doesn't give us that third dimension of like, which way are you pointing? Which way are you looking? It doesn't give you things like orientation. So certainly, like even with all these LiDAR tracking and of course AR kit provided by like basically AR toolkits provided by different companies such as Apple, Microsoft. So if you have, this means that the metaverse is becoming more important. It's becoming more and more important, and it's the total number of users that can access tools like this is becoming higher. And so in Kai-Fu Lee's recent book, he had an earlier book called AI Superpowers. I didn't include that. Maybe I should include it. I'll add it because this is an important book if you haven't read it already. AI superpowers is a good one. Oh, no, this one. Yeah. So this one. Okay. So in it, he talks about the next AI revolution, right? And like, what are all the previous ones? Let's ignore the previous ones. Just look at where he thinks things are going. Right now, he feels that AI does mostly interactions in our digital world. So, for example, it determines what your next Google result will be. It determines which movie you should watch. It determines what should be on your social media feed. So, the next step for this would be for AI to interact in the physical world. And so you can imagine having more and more digital things that have an impact on the physical environment. Examples of this today are the robots that you might see in an Amazon warehouse, or they might be an autonomous car or a truck for that matter. I talked about the future of transport before. And we are sharing more and more of our physical health information on the internet. We have smartwatches and we're seeing already some exercise routines that are augmented with digital information, such as the Peloton bikes or the fitness games that you can actually like that you can play on virtual reality as well. And so we're seeing this merging of the physical and the digital. And so that's a key aspect of the metaverse. And the third aspect of the metaverse, which I think is very important for business, is the notion that at some point in the future, of course, our digital assets become more valuable than our physical assets. So, just the question of how much is your social media information worth to companies today? Company valuations are based on the number of users, and typically, if there's, let's say there's a lifetime value, right, of $20 per user, then if you have a million users, then you have $20 million in valuation, right? So just have a million users and then boom, your company is worth, tens of millions very easily. So you can think of like the goods that we buy. Like, what are the goods that we buy online? They include things like maybe buying an online course, or if you take a some kind of like a Udacity course, for example, you buy any type of digital asset. It could be a template that you purchase on Teachers Pay Teachers. These are just assets that are purely digital, right? You're not buying a physical thing. Or if you purchase a video game nowadays, those are all digital assets that you're buying. If or in app, of course, there are many like in app assets as well. So um, these are like virtual assets that you still pay for with real money, like you use your credit card to pay for them. Um, but in some video games, of course, they have their own currency, like they have virtual money in some of the video games. In some places, it's actually it's interesting. Like there are some countries where the virtual currency is more stable than the local currency. So, for example, in this, let's see if I can find it. Money in the metaverse. Yes, this New Yorker article. So let me pull something up for you, and then maybe this will hopefully make things more clear. Okay, so in this New Yorker article about money in the metaverse, they refer to. Oh, it's kind of hard to see. They refer to that in there was this money that was inside a video game, the RuneScape video game, and it turned out to be more stable than Venezuela's bolivar currency. And these are just like virtual gold pieces that you could use, and people would pay you. for like transferring this gold so that they could, own things, so they could have like better weapons or better armor. Kind of like skins in Fortnite is another example of a digital good. Like you're just, it's kind of like a fashion thing, but it doesn't really impact the game itself. It's this kind of digital asset or this investment that you ideally, like, you want it to not just be a single purchase. You want it to be something that is a productive asset. That is something that you can draw income from. Now, there is a organization known as the Internet Gaming. Is it IGE? Internet Gaming Institute, and they found that in 2004, if you took all of the virtual assets that were out there in 2004, they'd be worth about $880 million US. So almost $1 billion US in 2004. But if you look at that change today in 2022, the same group believes that the value of commerce is closer to $80 billion a year bought and sold in virtual assets. The amount of this is the hockey stick curve. This is the one that is growing. EA, Electronic Arts, was famously mocked for requiring people to pay for in-game assets that would even allow them to progress in the game. Like, you couldn't even complete the game. The Bitcoin, the future money. Is this a recording? What are you selling today? Is the green screen behind you from Minecraft? Yes, green screen is from Minecraft. Is this a recording? It is not a recording. You can see I'm responding to you. What am I selling today? Knowledge. Knowledge about how to prepare. I'm selling how to prepare businesses for the metaverse. And what are the key truths that you need to know about the metaverse in order for your typical business to thrive. And I think that more and more, if we see all these big investments, a lot of companies don't even know what the metaverse is. So let's talk about that first, and then let's go into a little bit about how we can prepare. You had me worried. Thought you weren't live. No, don't you worry. No, I am live. One of those crazy people who likes to go live super early in the morning. So, great question. Thank you very much for that, PC Phil. I really appreciate it. So, you know what? Virtual, if you think about every single mobile game out there that you play, it's got some kind of in-game purchase in order to speed things up. But they usually run a freemium model, right? So you get the game for free, but then, you want to make progress? Like, my kids are exposed to all of these different types of games, and it's always the same thing. It's always, for them, it's like, you got to buy some kind of asset, right? Like, please upgrade, or please, get this bonus. It's like, it makes no sense. So if you want to get those premium bonuses, of course, you need to pay some kind of fee, and that's usually with your parents' credit card or their account. And if possible, they'll make this into a recurring fee. And so my question is, do you want to know a metaverse job that in 2009 was, okay, if I were to ask you, what is a metaverse job that was employing 1 million people, 1 million people in China in 2009, what would you guess that was? So PC Phil, any of you online, type in the chat. What would you think? So what was employing, what metaverse job was employing 1 million people in China in 2019? That is my question for you. This is an interesting question. What is the definition of a metaverse? So a metaverse is just a combination of the word meta and universe. And what it is defined as in Wikipedia is just a 3D version of the internet that is connected where people are connected socially. But like you can think of that like as any video game. You can also think of that as like interacting with Yelp or interacting with Google. The definition is so broad these days that it's pretty much meaningless. So really the question is who's making money? Who's making money on there? And that's my question, I think, is the more interesting question, is not what is the metaverse, it's who's making money on the metaverse. So yes, that's the company that Facebook was going to rename themselves to. Very good. Yes, you got it. So Meta, right? I like it. And universe. So this is really the nature of it. UI design. Phil, great question. Great comment. So, no, it wasn't. So there were 1 million gold farmers in the World of Warcraft game in China. 1 million people were employed farming freaking gold on World of Warcraft. 1 million. Can you imagine? Like, for like, if you could run a company that would employ 1 million people? And for some, like, this is serious money. This makes serious money in their local currency. So in theory, this metaverse is a good thing, right? Like how amazing would it be? Like, Google doesn't employ 1 million people, right? Like a single freaking video game employs 1 million people. Gold farming is a huge source of income. It's a huge employer. That seems kind of wacky that people play these games and they get paid for it. But increasingly, work that just creates digital goods, including like creating copy, marketing copy, creating advertisements on Facebook, like we were just talking about with Facebook here. Oh my God, I would rather mine for BTC. Yeah. Well, if you have the finances for it, absolutely. Right. But if you're like somebody who's in China, probably has to go to some internet cafe, like what options do you have to make good money in your local currency? You can't go and start affording to buy it because it's capital intensive to mine Bitcoin. And so there are many people who make a very solid income just creating these digital goods. And a lot of freelance work is just digital goods that are produced. So like I talked about Zynga, the makers of the game Farmville, which was a viral hit on Facebook. In fact, it made $100 million a year back in 2011. Essentially, people played in this virtual farm and they tended to their farm earning farm bucks. And what's interesting about this approach in Farmville is that it created this web of online social obligations because you would see your friends that were also, had their crops. If you didn't take care of your crops, then your crops would die. You remember the Tamagotchi? I don't know if anybody remembers the little toy. You had to take care of it. Otherwise, it would starve to death, And so it created this digital social obligation. It was connected to your Facebook account. It created social media accountability and the social media connection because you're connecting with other people who also play the games and are your friends. So now I don't want to disappoint people. And so the reality is these kinds of things are coming. The in-game economy is becoming quite big. There's a new game called Axie Infinity by Sky Mavis. And what's unique about this game that I find very interesting, it's unlike any other video game, is that most video games use a virtual currency, but it can be only used in the video game environment. But Axie Infinity actually uses a cryptocurrency that can be traded for goods outside of the game itself. And so we were talking about Bitcoin or like BTC. So it's a cryptocurrency. So Axie Infinity also runs off of this cryptocurrency as well. So during the pandemic, there were a number of individuals in the Philippines that became professional Axie Infinity players. It actually became more lucrative for them than local employment. Because as you played this game, you earn these healing potions, which have a certain value in US dollar. And you could earn governance tokens called AXS tokens. And each one of the governance tokens that you earned was actually worth $93 US. But of course, in order to even play, you had to buy a NFT or a non-fungible token, which was your own avatar. So every avatar was completely unique. It was a thing that you had to buy. It's crazy. Like they make money when you play the game, and they're expensive. Like you can spend anywhere from $100 to $1,000 just to have a really interesting character. So enough talking. Let me show you what this actually looks like. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. So play.
Matches because that's where the SLPs are given more frequently. But it is advised to fully max out your given axes. Accomplishing daily quests also hands out SLP and experience for your axes. So a healthy balance must be given to both PvP and PvE modes in the game. It was previously mentioned that 3 axes are needed to get started. The problem that keeps people in investing meta axes are the prices. The meta axis as of the moment is one plant axis that acts as a tank, a beast axis for DPS, and the fish axis for debuffing. Now if you're worried on spending for this game, there is an ongoing manager to scholar structure that people use. There are long-standing axis enthusiasts that have hundreds of axes, usually from the early days of NFT game when axis monsters and breeding were cheaper. Which is why this is where managers and scholars roll in.
There you go.
Managers are the individuals who have the means to lend axes to people, and those people who are lent axes are called scholars. The split between the two usually is 60% for the scholars and 40% for the manager. The scholar earns more from the cut because they are the ones playing the game. As soon as the scholars and managers make the cut, it is up to the scholar to either sell it to the market or hoard them until the price rises. It was also noted previously that breeding is possible with SLP, but scholars are not able to use this. Their job is to complete daily quests, fight PvP matches, and gain SLP.
Okay, whew. So I hope that kind of made sense. I know it's a little bit confusing, but people have described like axes as kind of like a Ponzi scheme. Because new players are needed in order to boost the value of these axes. And you talked about, like, you saw those 2 different roles, right? So one person is a like a manager, and then the other one is a scholar. So scholar is like the person in the Philippines like playing your character, taking care of it. And then the manager is the one who spends thousands of dollars and treats it as an investment. So that's that and Words with Friends. I remember Farmville, yes, and you remember Words with Friends. I love that. Yeah, I remember that game too. That was a good one. Actually, Words with Friends, like, it was a viral hit pretty fast. And so I could totally see like games like those can be more of where I see the metaverse going as well. And it's interesting. Phil was like had a few different guesses about employing people in China. So one was like financial structures. Absolutely, like that. These are brand new, right? And it's like craziness. That's a good way of describing it. I would describe it as crazy as well. So essentially, because you have those 2, the scholars and the managers, there's that pay split between them. You saw the 60-40 split, so they get most of it, right? So similar to a Tamagotchi back in the day. The money is split, so 60% goes to the scholar, and then 40% goes to the managers. So you can imagine if you wanted to make an investment in NFTs, you could just go buy a bunch of axes, and then you could employ people, a bunch of scholars who would basically play the game for free, and then they would do this 60-40 split. And so yeah, you need some money to get going, but then you'd have like this cash flow that would just keep growing on you. So all of a sudden, you become, by playing this game, an employer in the metaverse. Isn't that wacky? Like that is like all of a sudden you are the boss, you are the manager. All you had to do was buy an axie, And now you have become like for $1,000, you have become, or maybe $100, you have become an employer in that space. You are employing a actual person. Um, Flappy Bird. Oh my goodness, this is bringing back memories. I love it. So next, let's talk about why some people aren't buying in the metaverse and what companies can do to leverage the opportunities available in the metaverse. So here's what I found so far. And I believe that in order for the metaverse to really take off, we need an environment that is way more inclusive of women, way more inclusive of women. Um, because I remember the first time that I started up like the Oculus Quest, I just bought it. And I remember the first time I tried it, and I was greeted by an actual person. This is a woman. And I was like, oh, how come you're helping me out? It's like, well, somebody helped me out when I first started. And we're still friends on Oculus Quest. And she showed me how to use the interface, how to use the controllers. Like, this is my first time using it. And it kind of made me think, wow, that's like, when was the last time I played a video game and there were women in the video game? Like, it's super rare. And I've seen like things on the internet where there's a reason that they're super rare. And, you know, I think that the reality is like that if you can jump in like without any instructions and you can have other people who are there who can help you out, it really makes a big difference. And so I do feel that like there you won't get that critical mass in the metaverse without the buy-in from women. And there's something like that we need to do differently here. Like there's a reason why they're not there. And here's the key thing is that I believe that if we are coming from years and years and years of the gaming industry, where it's already pretty rare to see women in those games, then we've got major concerns about the future of the metaverse. It's funny because I see women. It's not funny. Like it's sad because like there are women who are trying out these video games. Like they're trying out video games that I haven't seen them try in other games. So a lot of it has to do with the user interface of most video games, right? What is the user interface? Like when you push a button, what happens when you push the button in the video game? Typically, it's some type of violence. You punch something, you shoot the gun, you cut with your knife. Typically, not always. Sometimes you jump, you run. Like there are other games as well. It's not one or the other. But what's the purpose of these games? Right? So if the interface is some sort of violence, then everything that you do within that virtual world is oriented around violence, is violence oriented. Versus something like Horizon venues, or just Horizon, in the I guess it's called Meta Horizon, or it used to be called Oculus venues or Oculus Horizon. The interface is mostly just walking around and talking to people, right? It's a different way of interacting with the metaverse. So I could see how that would be way more inclusive. It would show like the importance of the user interface in the metaverse. How do we want people to interact with each other? For example, do they use their hands, like their physical hands? Are they using things like the controllers, right? Like what are they using? Is this are they holding a lightsaber, right? If this is a lightsaber, then what is it? Like does it turn into a gun? Are you shooting something? These are really important questions when it comes to your interactions in the metaverse. And so that's going to impact money, and it's going to impact who's going to spend what. And so if the purpose of this interface is really like some sort of violence, then you can see how this basically determines how you would interact with the world. And what we're doing is we're living, especially in these virtual worlds, in an embodied space. Like that is, we perceive the world like based on the fact that we have a body, that we have hands, that we have legs. Like our experience in that world is embodied. But in the same way, we kind of discover our own body in the virtual world, and that's determined by how the game is built. And this is an important point, because we have to look at, well, what are the goods that women are buying? Like, what kind of virtual goods are women trying to buy in the metaverse or in virtual reality? And yeah, certainly it's possible to purchase learning in virtual reality. It's possible to buy beautiful templates or skins. Those are other examples. Um, of course, you can buy different types of clothing. They can also do things like sell knowledge. They can sell books, or you can sell videos online that becomes a course. There's many different examples of those, but I think a lot of those are the old school like 2D type of interface. And I really like the recent Meta keynote from John Carmack. He's one of the founders of id Software, makers of games such as Doom and Quake. And he said that we're not really leveraging the basic, the capability of working with basic websites enough in the metaverse. And he feels that like a lot of the initial applications are not going to be some 3D thing that's very complicated to make. And it's not everybody is able to participate in that. But if you could just take an existing person's video or existing website, then you would go a long way. In fact, one of the most popular applications on the Meta Quest is a virtual desktop application. You just interact with your existing desktop inside a virtual environment. It's weird that you would want to do that because you're kind of still alone. But I think that more and more we're starting to realize that, well, that's where a lot of the experience comes from today. You have to start where you're at. You cannot go and build everything from scratch. Building a game takes a significant amount of effort. And so that effort's coming down, but it still takes lots of artists, developers, modelers, animators, voice actors. There's just a ton of effort. So at this time, like creating 3D scenes and capture devices, like it will take some time before it becomes more and more common. But the way that we interact is, I mentioned, very important. And I think if we look at the types of skins and colors, so normally a skin, if you bought it in Fortnite, only applies for that game, right? But imagine if you bought a skin as an NFT, or you bought a character, as an NFT, and you could take that character, like your kind of like the Axie. Like, let's say you bought the Axie, and then now I could use the Axie in a number of different games. I think that's where they're trying to get at, but that's going to require a little bit of coordination between game companies, like on those things like 3D formats, and allowing them to do that. And so, why do people buy these? Like, why do people buy NFTs? What do you think? Any ideas? Like, if people are spending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, non-fungible token, what are they trying to do? Right? Like, some people are seeing this as, whoa, it's like a piece of art. And so there's an expectation that this is an investment, like it's going to increase in value over time. And another reason could be, like, sometimes when you buy these things, they give you exclusive access to certain clubs. Like, you're part of the yacht club, for example. You get to go to events and to parties that other people don't have access to because they don't have one of these. That's an example. So it's more about like the respect that person gets, or the social circles that person gets to be in when somebody has this type of NFT, for example. And so, yeah, all these games are these companies, like I mentioned at the very beginning, these video game platforms are making huge investments in video game platforms. But the fact that it's from video game platforms also indicates that we have a very, very long way to go. And what do I mean by that? Let's see if I can find it. So this article, and I'm going to bring it up. This is important. Like, if you want to know what the experience for women is in the metaverse so far, and this led to a recent change, by the way, that happened this week. Yeah. So in this Vice article, this woman claims that she was virtually gang raped in Facebook's metaverse. Within 60 seconds of joining, I was verbally and sexually harassed. Basically, when she joined, what she said is that people came in and they just started, like, their hands started touching her, her virtual avatar. And obviously that made her feel incredibly uncomfortable and justifiably so. And as a result, like a week later, Facebook changed the algorithm inside Horizons, their activities, so that you had a social distance. So like the maximum you could reach is like the social distance of the other person. So if the other person didn't reach their hand out to the maximum extent, you could not even interact with them that way. So there's like a little bit more space between people. And that kind of made me think, wow, like, that why are we so far from here? Like, why are we still like, this is not even like our regular society? And the truth is, it isn't. So how did it get to this point? And that's what I want to explore a little bit today, so that there's an understanding of why this is really important. So there's this video from Queen Maze. She talks a little bit about the history of video games and how it was very inclusive for women, and I'll let her explain why she thinks that more men play video games than women. Here we go.
Equal. Games were not targeted at men or females, they were actually targeted at adults. The goal wasn't to target a game at a specific gender, it was just to make a fun game that people enjoyed playing. That's why if you go back and you look at some of the early games, you'll see video games such as tic-tac-toe, checkers, centipede, nothing that was super heavily targeted and marketed to males. It was so evenly distributed. Video gaming was actually in the electronics aisle. It was marketed to both men and female. Anyone and their mom would go to electronic aisle and get what they wanted and get the games. That's when marketing came in. What did marketing do? So they decided to switch gaming from the electronics aisle to marketing it as a toy. They did this because in the 1980s, there was the great video game recession or crash. Basically, everyone was making video games, and not all of them good. If you have no idea what's going on, neither did the 1980s. And so there were a lot of really bad games out there and people just weren't buying them. So marketers were trying to revamp the video game industry. So how they did that is they decided to get really targeted with their audience. So they went to some gaming competitions and saw there were some more males at those gaming competitions than females. So they decided to go full on and market it to 10-year-old boys. That was their sole goal, was marketing to 10-year-old boys. In marketing, the more targeted you are, the more you are going to get the bang for your buck. And with the gaming industry being basically at the brink of bankruptcy, they had to be as targeted as possible. And that's when we get this whole no girls allowed in the video game industry. And that's why we get things like Game Boy. And if you ever watch marketing trailers, it's very highly targeted at men. And that's why for like 20 something years, we saw more men than women play video games. Women were marketed products such as like dolls and like Barbie playhouses. We were marketed stuff like that, and boys were marketed Game Boy, the PS2, the PS3. It was all very heavily targeted at men, and so that's why we're trying to play catch up now, and why we see such an increase in men playing video games versus women in the past. And if you ever check out old video games, you'll see the women's role always like a lesser than role than the man. So
Okay, so I hope that one makes sense. Like the history there, I think Queen Maze does a good job of explaining it. Yeah, like essentially, she's saying we did have a lot more equality in games before. However, during the times where they started visiting doing market research at these competitions, they found out, more males were interested in the competition. So the assumption was that males were the ones who were buying the games, or the most avid players of these games. And so that led into where we are today. And so we have a long, long ways to go as a result. And I think that it's kind of hard to understand. Like, I think that we could run an entire course on this, but I do think that some of the best stuff that I've seen on the web, just about learning about the how women are portrayed in video games, comes from Feminist Frequency. She's been doing this for years, since 2013, so more than almost 10 years now. And I want to talk about her tropes in video games, just the end part of it, which talks about some of her reflections. And I think that her reflections are very well thought out. And so I thought, why don't we explore a few of those? So let's go.
Implications, game creators aren't necessarily all sitting around twirling their nefarious-looking mustaches while consciously trying to figure out how to best misrepresent women as part of some grand conspiracy. Most probably just haven't given much thought to the underlying messages their games are sending, and in many cases, developers have backed themselves into a corner with their own game mechanics. When violence is the primary gameplay mechanic, and therefore the primary way that the player engages with the game world, it severely limits the options for problem solving. The player is then forced to use violence to deal with almost all situations because it's the only meaningful mechanic available, even if that means beating up or killing the women they're meant to love or care about. One of the really insidious things about systemic and institutional sexism is that most often regressive attitudes and harmful gender stereotypes are maintained and perpetuated unintentionally. Likewise, engaging with these games is not going to magically transform players into raging sexists. We typically don't have a monkey-see, monkey-do direct cause and effect relationship with the media we consume. Cultural influence works in much more subtle and complicated ways. However, media narratives do have a powerful cultivation effect, helping to shape cultural attitudes and opinions.
Okay, so in this, I hope that the terminology isn't too complicated. She's not saying that, people play these games and they suddenly become sexist, but you can also imagine a woman in this game would not see themselves represented. And I think that that's the main argument that she's doing here. And I think that the part, she does explain some examples of what would good structures look like. And I think it is from these examples that businesses can learn from, that can be ways of empowering women, which I actually think is pretty powerful. And I think that this is something that is something to note. And so maybe we'll go into the next one where she actually talks about positive examples. And I found them they're empowering examples. So let's go.
Straps and never need anything from anyone. Of course, there is absolutely nothing wrong with offering or occasionally needing assistance.
Jade! Hang on, Jade! I'm coming! Free yourself, Jade! I'll create a diversion!
The human impulse to help others in need is certainly not a negative thing. It only becomes a problem when acts of altruism are repeatedly presented in heavily gendered ways that are bound up in harmful myths about women as perpetual victims and men as paternalistic saviors. In fact, cooperation and mutual aid are concepts that hold an enormous amount of gaming potential. True co-op games, MMOs, and some RPGs offer gameplay possibilities that, if done right, can facilitate a mutual aid-style adventure involving people of all genders cooperating. Where Is My Heart and Thomas Was Alone both employ innovative examples of mutual aid by having a single player control multiple characters working together towards a common goal.
Okay, so in this one, I really like that example, that the example right at the beginning, which was just, there's a damsel in distress, like she's bound up, but instead of saving her, right, like the character just like throws a weapon towards her and it's just like, I'll create a diversion. And so she ends up saving herself, which is a very empowering thing. And I was speaking to my wife about this, and she said, like, actually, Frozen was kind of like that as well, where there was a moment in the movie Frozen where Hans says to Anna, it's like, what can I do? What do you need? What can I do to help? Which was extremely empowering for Anna. Like I as a guy totally did not notice this at the beginning, but she's saying like, yeah, like this is it, right? Like she can rescue herself. And I think that we have opportunities to do that in games. We can change the narrative. In fact, like if that can make people more open, right? Like that the winning character is female and she wins by her own ability, that's hugely empowering. I see that as definitely like there's huge potential there. Now, I don't need to explain too much, but okay, we are like kind of really far in the gaming world for an equal representation of women and, of course, different body types and different representations of women. And we are even farther when it comes to people of color. And this is something that I talked about yesterday in the live stream, was just, we have to be prepared, right? Like it is going to be things like cancel culture. It is going to be public outrage that is going to be the biggest liability for companies in the metaverse. And we have to look at video games and where that representation is. And then we'll start to see how far we are from the reality of like equality, at least in the world of video games. So back to feminist frequency. Here we go.
That they're appropriating. These false, harmful myths and stereotypes continue to contribute to the marginalization and oppression of women of color in America today. For instance, in her book, The Politics of Disgust, feminist theorist Ange Marie Hancock discusses how racial stereotypes about Black women contribute to a political system in which the marginalized continue to be underserved, oppressed, and unheard. We very rarely see portrayals of women of color in games that incorporate the cultural history of those characters in honest, respectful ways. In many ways, Alex Vance from Half-Life 2 and its follow-up episodes is a great character, and it's good to see a non-sexualized woman of color in such a prominent role, but the game isn't concerned with her cultural background. Nilin, the biracial protagonist of Remember Me, is a sexualized female protagonist, but the sexualization doesn't employ racist tropes. Like Alex, her cultural background is treated as irrelevant. Unfortunately, there aren't many positive examples of women of color in games whose cultural history isn't erased but also isn't presented as the stuff of racist stereotypes. And that's a shame, because characters whose cultural background is incorporated honestly and respectfully can work to challenge the deeply racist status quo. We're at least seeing some improvement where Black male protagonists are concerned. Though they're far from perfect in terms of representation, 2016's Watch Dogs 2 and Mafia 3 center Black male characters and acknowledge Black identity and structural racism as aspects of their characters' lives. Mafia 3 does feature a supporting character named Cassandra, a woman of Haitian heritage whose background is very important to her character. Cassandra fights the entrenched Italian mafia and their racist brutality against the poor Black citizens of the game's fictional southern city. The game 1979 Revolution doesn't center a woman as its protagonist, but in telling the story of the Iranian Revolution, it illustrates how games can introduce players to new cultural perspectives in ways that are respectful and compelling, and that work to counteract stereotypes rather than to reinforce them.
We are a nation of equality greater than Western capitalism.
One game with a female protagonist that does an excellent job of incorporating a character's cultural history and traditions is Never Alone, which stars a young girl named Nunya, a member of the Inupiat people of Alaska. Folklore and traditions of the Inupiat are incorporated throughout the game in a respectful way that enriches the player's understanding of these people and their experiences. This kind of respectful treatment of cultural history and traditions should be the norm, but instead, games more often just plunder marginalized cultures with no sense of respect and no concern whatsoever about accurately reflecting the people and traditions they're appropriating from.
Okay, so here, whoops, back to the metaverse. All right. So feminist frequency has a lot of deep reflections about this, and I do think that in the video game space, can you think about like the richness? Like if you can really get into different cultures, you can really like show that type of appreciation. Like games wouldn't be all the same. It's just like running in and shooting something. Like it's getting boring. And if you can start to use things like exploring culture in a virtual world, that's a way better way of experiencing it because you can become that individual. Like when you're playing the game, sometimes you are playing that character, the racialized character. And so it is a way of embodying that experience in a way that is very difficult in a, just like say playing a straight, just playing a video game or, you know, trying to read about it in a book. This is a very different experience. So there's a strong opportunity there. And it points to creating that environment that is very inclusive. And so that's kind of my main message for today is that the metaverse, like we're talking about the metaverse and we're talking about making money. And then suddenly I start talking about inclusion because we are not going to reach the critical mass if we do not have a critical mass of women who are participating in the metaverse, who are seeing value in the stuff that they create, and they're seeing themselves fairly represented. And just some of the indications, the early indications from Facebook's Meta and this article and their need to change things like personal space indicate that we still have a long way to go. Things have not changed. Even though the interface is different in Horizon, we still see that type of really insensitive behavior, right? And it's kind of difficult because people feel more anonymous on the web. And so there isn't as many people, like a critical mass of women who are calling that out in the virtual space, right? This has been like a play area for boys for a long time. And it's time for that to change. And so part of my message around AI parenting, like what do I focus on, is that we need to think about AI and games and this virtual environment from the perspective of, would I be comfortable with my son or my daughter playing this activity, being a part of this virtual world, being subjected to the AI algorithms? And more, we need to think about what happens under the hood. For a long time, computers, like I used to build, my first job was building computers. And at that time, like we took the motherboard and we just like slot in like the graphics cards and stuff. It was not pretty inside, but it worked, like who cares? It just worked. And just recently, I had to replace the batteries on my MacBook Pro. And in it, like when I opened it up, I'm like, wow, somebody actually spent some time here underneath the hood. And you notice those things. It comes out, right? Like what happens underneath is important. So just like we have ESRB ratings, which will tell us like the maturity rating of a game. Is it for mature audiences only? Can teens play it? Is it general for everyone? We need to have those types of ratings for the AI that happens underneath. Does this impact particular people, like particular genders in one way or another? Does it impact people of color disproportionately from others? And the reality is there's nothing today. There is no certification, there is no rating system. And so as a result, people just get these algorithms, these AI algorithms that tend to hire more men. They tend to cause certain people of color to get hired less, even though it's not built into the data. There are other ways that the AI can detect the racial like categorization of that individual. Like for example, the postal code, or the zip code, I guess, in the United States. That's a simple way of telling. And so there are real challenges, and we need to look at them critically, because the reality is, like, these systems, which are mostly built around engagement. So if you think of, like, well, what do you end up seeing on your Facebook feed? It's mostly things that people engage with. So what do people engage with? They engage with, like, very like negative things, right? Like, oh, look at this terrible thing in politics, or look at this really big scandal, and that's what you get more of. And so we're such an like we're much more angry. We are way more divided than we've ever been, and we're like looking out less for each other than we have in the past. And so I think it's time, as well past time, to start looking at AI that a parent would be proud to share with their children. It is way past time. And so I'm really hoping that from the session that you saw today, and from some of the learnings that you've got today, that you've got some takeaways, that there's something there that is new for you, or something that is of interest. I have a little course. It's called the Mastering Screen Time. And there's a lot of parents who are concerned about screen time. And so I say, like, it is not even about screen time these days, right? Like, even the Pediatrics Association, they're saying that, oh, well, screen time generally you want to avoid before 3 years of age, but if you're doing a Zoom call, if you're doing a video call with the grandparents, it's fine. It just means that we need to rethink, what does it even mean? What does it mean to be? What does it mean to have screen time? And we need to redefine screen time. I feel like the categories are just all wrong. We need to start looking not just at the screens that you use, but how you use them. And so we want to move people from just sedating, right? So I'm using it so that you just do something, just occupy them, to relating. So we start to understand their interests. We start to understand the person, like the child, and then ultimately to creating. We want them to be able to see themselves as independent and able to express themselves using digital means. That could be through a game. It could be through Minecraft. It could be through building something. Maybe that's their jam. Great. So what can we do that can help you move a little bit further? Because a lot of the lessons that we want to teach them today, resilience, you name it, right? We want them to be, like, more independent. We want them to know how to create friends. They can all be connected to their interests. And it could be their interests are increasingly on screens these days. And so being conscious of this, being aware of this is key. And for any business that is thinking about the metaverse, I would encourage them, think about those things. Think about diversity. Think about equity. Think about inclusion, right? How are you including different people? Because people want to buy, and this applies for any product. They want to buy things that with companies that align with their values, right? You feel like, oh, I really align with the founders, his morals, their values, their principles, like what they stood for. And increasingly, data is the same way. Where you are in the future, especially with the metaverse as a consumer, is, yes, there's money, but there's also your data. And what we're finding is the biggest threat, the biggest loss for Facebook or for Meta was not the $10 billion that they spent on investing in the metaverse. It turns out that was a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the $270 million that disappeared when they started losing people's data. And they started losing people's data because people saw what was going on. They saw the hate that they were perpetuating, and they also saw that they were doing nothing about it. The January 6th riots, all of that stuff, they saw, like, this is not a moral company. right? Like this is not a company that aligns with my values. So I'm going to stop submitting posts to that platform, or I'm going to stop working with that company. I'm going to delete my data. And if you're a company whose like business depends on getting people's data in order to profit, you're in a lot of trouble, because people have choices, right? And they will go with the choice that fits their values the most. Okay? So I want you to check this out. Check out the website, see if there's something that's useful for you, and reach out to me. There's a contact page, so just like click on the contact page. It's aiparenting.live. And so go to AI Parenting, send me a contact. If there's something that we can help you with, family or business side, that will help you better prepare for the metaverse, or help you better enable your own developments that will be related to, say, could be your family, for example, in the metaverse, let us know. We're here to help. That's really what AI parenting is all about. And we're going to keep talking about the metaverse. So if you found this useful, like hit like, hit subscribe, follow our account, because we're going to be posting a lot more about this. This is an area that I'm really passionate about, and I don't see. I'm looking for other people who are talking about this, and they're just talking about making money, but they're not talking about making money long term, if that makes sense. Everybody's saying like, oh, you do this, and then you're going to quickly make money. And I remember the Warren Buffett saying that like the goal in investing is not to lose money. And so the worst situation that could happen to a company is that you earn a ton of money, and then because of ethical challenges, that money gets scaled back in a big way. Because then what's going to happen? You have to fire people, right? You have to let people, like, terrible things happen at that point. People give up on your company. And so that is the key. And so I want to say thank you to PC Phil. Oh, I missed Kuchenspet. Tip your hat. All right, there you go. It's tipped. And I also want to thank some of the others joining us online. Thank you to Phil. I do appreciate anybody who's able to join. And if you were not able to comment, just leave a message. Don't worry, I'll respond right after this. Sometimes it acts kind of weird. The thing doesn't connect, but today it looks like I was able to send out a message. And so I will see you all soon. Just before I go, one last thing on the website. Check that out. Right now, I believe if you sign up for the mail list, we're giving away a free screen time to like sedation relation creation chart that you can use. It's basically a little sticker chart that you can use with your kids, and you can talk about like how many times they use the screen, and then how much of it was relation, how much of it was sedation, how much of it was relation, and how much of it was creation. Because a lot of the first steps for improving your screen use is just knowing how it's used. So if you have some visualization, you put some stickers on for each one, or you put some stickers on before they do the activity, then you have a sense of like in a given week, like this is how much they spent on that. Okay, how do I want to move it towards relation? We have a bunch of videos that are specifically about that. You can check out the YouTube channel. Just search AI Parenting. I'm right there as well. And for everyone who's joining on Amazon, I made a bunch of links to books, such as AI 2041. I'm running through that one. Really interesting. I love it because it's describing the future from the perspective of not only the technology, but stories. And I think the stories are compelling. We need to pay more attention to stories of what the future could be like. I put a couple books about the metaverse, and I put the old one about Snow Crash, and of course, Ready Player One. AI superpowers is important to kind of see the two connections, so these two worlds, the United States and China, like what's going on? What was that Sputnik moment that caused China to say, oh, AI is really important. We got to invest like crazy in here. And why are they teaching AI from kindergarten all the way to grade 12? You'll learn some of that from that book. Or I have videos about this as well. You just go to aiparenting.live/blog. You'll see all that stuff as well. And then the last one is, of course, the book that she mentioned, The Politics of Disgust. I think that having some level of awareness of this is going to be a critical survival skill for companies. They don't see it maybe like when they're kind of initially, hustling and they're grinding. But anybody who wants to think about their business long term better have some thought around how they're including women. Better have some thought about how they're including people of color at the decision making table. I mean, just this week, no, yesterday, the CEO of Spotify goes and says, oh, yeah, well, diversity is important to us. So we're going to invest $100 million towards a bunch of programs related to diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's so interesting. They fail over and over and over again, right? Like, because they're basically saying, well, we have this one, person, Joe Rogan. He's so important. We'll give him $100 million. And then for everyone else, you can get like this little like scrap of another 100 million that we're going to allocate. And it just shows how unequal things are. And it also shows that if you do not include people of color at the decision-making table of your business, you cannot make decisions that will be towards reconciliation. It is impossible. You will try and you will fail, right? You will just have more and more backlash. And I keep seeing this over and over again. They think, oh, I'm the, I can lead through this. But the reality is you don't have the lived experience of these individuals and what they're going through. And if you are the one who are making these decisions about how to go about reconciliation, you will fail over and over and over again. So while Spotify's stock keeps dropping, $2 billion, one weekend, is going to be $3 billion next week. This is costing them a huge amount of money. And I think that recognizing that you hurt people and you are not the right person. Like the reason you hurt people is because you're not aware of what the issues are. And you remain unaware of what the issues are. So you cannot come up with what the method of reconciliation will be. And so increasingly, this is an area that's really a passion point of mine. I'm doing some interesting training to learn a little bit more about anti-racism, learning a little bit more about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I feel that as I learn more about this, especially when it comes to tech, video games, the metaverse, I think that it all applies. It all applies here, right? All the biases that you see people talking about applies to the metaverse. It applies to our world today. And so with that, I want to thank you guys so much for joining today. I think that it's just highlighting just a few of the issues. And there's a lot that we have to get through. But I do see a lot of potential for people to be included. I know that I've heard this time and time again, like a lot of female players, they choose male avatars because they know that they'll get less harassment. Well, I mean, it's unfortunate. It's what they have to do for today. I think, maybe we can learn to be more inclusive, but this is not going to happen overnight. And so we can work towards building it, but at the very least, like there are ways that people can protect their identity or falsify their identity if that's the thing that's going to help them be more included. But we do need to make it comfortable for people to be themselves, their authentic selves, virtually. And we've got a really long ways to go before that. Anyways, with that, I want to say that this is not like a moment that I consider to be like a doom and gloom moment. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to really win and to lead. The companies that do consider like ethics, they do consider inclusion, they do consider like the different gender roles within their community, are going to thrive. They're going to do really well. And the ones that are just really just exploiting people and their data for money are going to be exposed. It's going to become more and more clear and more transparent. And so in the future, I'm hoping to do a few more evaluations. Maybe I'll look at different metaverses, different games that were acquired. I'll look at them maybe from an evaluation of like the underlying algorithms. And then from there, maybe you'll get a sense of like the kinds of frameworks and the rubrics that I use for that type of evaluation and maybe even certification. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I will see you again soon. Thanks. Take care.